Hello there. You're watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages. It's time to see what's making headlines with the writer and broadcaster Polly Mackenzie and the political editor of the Scottish Sun, Rachel Watson. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's take a look at what is on some of those front pages. We'll start with the Daily Express, which says the Prime Minister has vowed to win the next general election. That says Tory MPs plot to have Boris Johnson removed, according to the Telegraph. The Mirror's headline is directed at Mr Johnson. It says, as you can see, go now. Now, tomorrow's Mail leads with a call from the Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, to reveal an alleged pact between the Labour and Liberal Democrat parties. The FT leads with the US Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v Wade, which would deprive millions of American women the ability to get an abortion. Well, The Sun says Katie Price has avoided a jail sentence after breaking a restraining order. And a reminder, by scanning that QR code that you see on your screen right now during the programme, you can check out the front pages of the papers while you watch along with us. Well, let's bring in our guests, joined by the writer and broadcaster Polly Mackenzie and the political editor of the Scottish Sun, Rachel Watson. Polly, Rachel, good evening to you. Thank you very much for being with us. Let's get straight into it, and we'll start with the front page of the Times. Now, after that by-election defeat and Boris Johnson losing Oliver Dowden, Conservative Party chairman, there is now a new threat, the Times say. Polly, tell us some more about what the reporting tells us.
Well, we know that Boris Johnson won a vote of confidence in his leadership, but by a much smaller margin than he would have hoped and his predecessor, Theresa May, secured, even though she then was gone within 6 months. So those plotters, the 148 MPs who did vote no confidence in the Prime Minister, and potentially some others who have been a bit spooked by what's happened in those two by-elections, are now thinking about what can they do in order to potentially unseat Boris Johnson. Previously, the speculation was that, led by David Frost, the former Brexit minister, was that they would be trying something on in the autumn around party conference time. But they're now looking at how to gain control of the executive of the 1922 committee, the Committee of Backbench MPs, because if they control the executive, which is having elections soon, then the executive can change the rules and mean that Boris Johnson can face another vote of confidence at some point before his kind of year of protection is out. So that's the kind of the gossip going around among the rebels in Westminster. But equally, on the other side, the parliamentary private secretaries are being encouraged to also get involved in those elections for the 1922 committee to try and shore up Boris Johnson's position.
Rachel, as Polly said, that's the gossip, but it's being quite widely reported, isn't it, this idea that they're going to try and change the rules of the game of that 1922 committee to make sure that this confidence vote can be held in him again.
Yeah, I think almost as soon as we had the result from the last vote of no confidence that the Prime Minister just won, there was chat that the rules could be changed, because I don't think many people expected that there would be 148, that size of rebellion. You know, I've spoken to Tory politicians since then who say they'd back the Prime Minister all the way through Partygate until they'd seen the size of the rebellion in the Commons. So I think, we've heard about it since then. I think what's interesting about this Times piece as well, that they have kind of dug into that Oliver Dowden resignation today. And have spoken to one minister who said that, he actually quit. He saw the writing on the wall. He didn't want to stick about, suggesting that there's other ministers that could be looking at doing the same thing, jump before they're pushed if Boris Johnson does try and reshuffle his cabinet to make that more supportive and junior minister positions as well. But this minister is also suggesting that Oliver Dowden has left his position as chairman of the party to go and run a leadership campaign for Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, who, we all know would probably like a chance to run for number 10 if that came around.
Yeah, certainly do. All right, let's move on to the front page of the Mail, if we can, please, Polly and Rachel. And this is a line from an interview that they've done with Health Secretary Sajid Javid, who wants someone to tell the public the truth about the anti-Tory pact. He says an apparent Lib-Lab alliance was what dealt Boris the double by-election blow. Polly, what's all this about? Because whenever I get the chance to ask anyone in the Labour Party or the Lib Dems about any pact, they say, no, there's nothing to see here.
Well, I mean, there isn't a pact. There's no agreement. Nothing's written down. However, it was really clear in those two by-elections that the voters are pretty sensible. Hardly anyone voted Labour in Tiverton or Honiton. Labour lost their deposit. Hardly anyone voted Lib Dem in Wakefield. The Lib Dems lost their deposit. And that's partly because the voters can just, they can do maths. And what's really interesting about this moment that should not give the Conservatives comfort is that people actually are willing to take anyone but Boris candidate and switch their vote. You've really got to hate the incumbent to be willing to sort of trade your vote to any comer, basically, which is what we saw happening. But that doesn't mean that there's a formal pact. It does mean that if you think forward to the general election, all of the parties, especially the Lib Dems, actually a very small party with tiny resources in comparison with the others, they're not going to campaign hard in every seat. It would be mindless stupidity to do so. They're going to campaign in the places where they've got the best prospects. And the Labour Party is going to campaign in the places where it's got the best prospects. Why waste resources sending whatever canvassers out in Tiverton and Honiton in the next general election when they could be down the road in Exeter defending a Labour seat, or down the road in Bournemouth trying to take ground off the Conservatives? It just wouldn't make any sense. That's different, right? Because in 2019, Jeremy Corbyn did try and target anything to stop those people who defected from Labour via Change UK to the Lib Dems, to stop them getting elected, diverting resources from the main fight against the Conservatives. But Jeremy Corbyn was a fool.
Yeah. OK. And Polly, Rachel, let's... in the reporting here on the front page of the Mail, they talk about this Lib-Lab alliance, but I think you will agree with me that perhaps the most important pact, if there is anyone to be done with the Labour Party, would be with the SNP in Scotland, perhaps?
Yeah, and I think just talking about this kind of tactical voting where you try and vote for vote someone out rather than vote someone in particular, is something we've seen in a number of elections here. The Liberal Democrats have benefited from it in seats where they can, anybody but the SNP has worked. We saw the pro-independent side try and harness that with more Green vote in the last election as well. So tactical voting is something that is being used in Scotland, and people have become quite good at it, actually, when you look at the election results, where that goes. But yeah, there is chat, and if there's a hung parliament at the next general election, for example, could that see a deal with Labour and the SNP? This is something that the Conservatives have spoken up. They've talked that up in campaigns over the last couple of general elections to voters. Do you want the SNP in power in some way in England as well, with a pact with the Labour Party to get them into number 10? The Labour Party repeatedly push this down. They say that they wouldn't do pacts. Keir Starmer said it, and Anas Sarwar, the Scottish Labour leader, said that there would be no deal. But I spoke to Professor John Curtis a few weeks ago, who said if Keir Starmer's got the option of number 10 or having to resign because he's lost an election or won't work with SNP in a hung parliament, what's he going to pick? So it could be a very interesting next general election.
And just pick up on that a little bit, if you can then, Polly. I mean, what do you think voters would feel about the idea of these kind of alliances? Even though nothing's written down, nothing formal, but the knowledge that the parties are working together.
Well, I think the voters prefer to have all of the options on the ballot paper and to make their own choices. And I think that's, in the vast majority of circumstances, what they'll see. Back in 2015, when David Cameron won a majority, he did so by precisely what Rachel's talking about, real scaremongering about the SNP, about the Lib Dems. The tagline was chaos under Ed Miliband, which, we all now sort of chuckle at, given the extraordinary chaos we have seen since 2015 under the succession of slightly hopeless Conservative prime ministers. But, I think the reality is that the Conservatives want to fight that message again. They know it worked for David Cameron. They think it still works. But I just think kind of chaos under Keir Starmer doesn't seem anywhere near as scary. And they have thrown so many rules out. They have done such chaotic government. They have lurched us through, lying to the Queen and proroguing Parliament and so much stuff, that the idea that there's a threat from chaos, I just don't think it's got that electoral magic anymore.
Perhaps not. Okay, Polly, Rachel, do appreciate that. Stay with us because there's plenty more to come from you, we hope, after the break. But still to come here on Sky News, we'll take a look at that US Supreme Court ruling on abortion rights. It's featured, as you can see there, on the front page of the FT. We'll get Polly and Rachel's opinion on that after the break. Hello and welcome back. You're watching the press preview. I'm pleased to say we're joined by the writer and broadcaster, Polly Mackenzie, and the political editor of the Scottish Sun, Rachel Watson. All right, guys, thanks for being with us again. All right, let's look at the front page of the FT, the story that we've been leading with all night, of course, the Supreme Court knocking down Roe versus Wade. Polly, we've heard in our reporting this morning both sides of this argument. It's another massive dividing line issue in the United States, but most concerning for many people, I guess, will be the rights of the women who've lost the right to choose.
Yeah, it's devastating from the kind of the personal tragedies that will ensue from this, and also from a sense of the toxic partisan nature of politics in the US at the moment. At the heart of this for me certainly is this idea of forcing women to carry fetuses that they do not want. The thought of being pregnant without your consent is so horrifying to me. And, let alone when you talk about the number of states who have no exemptions for incest, no exemption for the health of the mother, the life of the mother. It's just horrifying to think what will happen, because of course it will not ban abortion. You can ban abortion, but everywhere through history that has happened, you just push abortion into the dark places where it is unsafe and dangerous for the women, for their ability to bear children in future. There was an amazing piece of writing by the author Ursula Le Guin circulating earlier on Twitter that I read, and never come across it before, but talking about how if she had to have a child when she got pregnant, when she was at university, she would never have had her other 3 children because she'd have never met her husband. And so this idea that you are saving lives when you are actually putting so many lives at risk is just simply it's heartbreaking. And it has been done by a process where a series of 2 presidents who did not win the popular vote have put in lifetime appointments to the Supreme Court. It does feel like American democracy is quite profoundly broken.
Well, pick up on that then, if you can, for us, Rachel. I mean, what do you think this tells us about the future direction of the US? I mean, there are calls to perhaps reform the Supreme Court, but that could end up in some kind of arms race where both sides, whoever is in power, change the court in different ways.
Yeah, and I think we've heard about concerns way back when Donald Trump made his appointment to the Supreme Court as well. There were concerns about packing the court and what they could do to change it then. But you talk about the future and what this might mean more fully. I've been watching the coverage all day and listening to people's concerns about this judgment, because it not only, it rolls back on Roe versus Wade, it takes away that right to abortion for women, but there's also concerns about what it could mean for access to contraception, because this is mentioned in a gay marriage. And there's real concerns. I've watched American politicians today raise real fear, actually, on what could be next. This is a right. They are rolling back people's rights here. And a comment from Nancy Pelosi where she said that American women today have less freedom than their mothers do. We all live in a time where rights have been extended over time, and this feels, this is the United States of America, and they are rolling back on rights that women have.
Yeah, and you're nodding along to some of that, Polly. I mean, it's hard to draw lessons from the US, isn't it? And obviously we're a very different country here, but is there any kind of lesson that can be drawn from what we're seeing in the US right now, do you think?
I actually think it's really important that we do protect our political discourse from kind of assumptions that everything is the same here. People sometimes say that Boris Johnson's as bad as Trump. I don't like Boris Johnson very much. He's not as bad as Trump. People say that racism is horrific and out of control in the United Kingdom. It is terrible, but it's nowhere near as bad as it is in the United States, where the numbers of black people killed by the police is just completely out of step with what happens in the United Kingdom. So we do need to be mindful that, we actually have a much more, I think, settled set of opinions and rights for women. There are still debates at the margin. During lockdown, for example, women were permitted to have abortion drugs at home, and there was then a parliamentary fight to extend that, and others were sceptical. There are some on the conservative right who'd like to see, the time limit for abortion brought down. But that's a complete world away from, a discourse in the United States where there are individual states who think that a woman should be forced to bring a child to term, even if it will kill her, even if that child is the result of being raped by her father.
Absolutely right. OK, Polly Mackenzie and Rachel Watson, do appreciate your time